to do some more of your asks, and I might go over some Walking Dead news, although we haven't gotten much. But I can get you caught up on the few tidbits that I do have. But let's start with getting these asks answered. Okay, so this first one, I didn't know that the "What's Your Wound" line in 905 was spoken by Morgan, Lori, Abraham, and Beth. What's your theory as to why they had those characters say it, specifically Beth, kind of an odd grouping considering Morgan is still alive and the others are all dead, or so the audience thinks. Um, yeah, I mean, I put forth a couple of theories. I really don't think we've entirely nailed down what the specific logic is for this, but I do think it's there. I just don't know if we've entirely hit on it because my first thought was that she was the only one who is presumed dead that we believe is alive. But like you said, Morgan is alive. So it's not like all of them are alive other than her, or all of them are dead, or it's not quite that cut and dry. Um, I think that a lot of it may have to, you have to maybe take into account the availability of the actors. If they wanted someone who just couldn't come do such a small part for a single episode, then maybe they wouldn't have been able to use them. But on the other hand, they did totally AI and CGI Scott, who had passed away by then. So Scott Wilson. So, I mean, they really could have done anything, and an actor can record a voiceover from really wherever they're at. So I don't know that I believe that it was based just on availability, although we have to at least acknowledge that. Um, I want to go back and rewatch this and do more of a deep dive because we know a lot more than we did even then. And Morgan is just so interesting. He is so often paralleled with Beth. And um, uh, Gladriel Jones has a whole theory about how he's a prophet and he sort of in a lot of ways breaks the fourth wall and shapes reality about what's going on. He was the one that transitioned and went to a different spinoff, and now he's coming back, which is interesting. Um, so I don't know. I think the best I could do right now is say Morgan, according to most of the general audience who does not believe Beth is alive and coming back, Morgan is the only one there who is, alive, quote unquote. All the rest were supposedly dead characters, but Beth is so heavily aligned with Morgan and paralleled with Morgan that I feel like that's a sign that she's coming back, same as Morgan is. Because, I mean, Morgan left before that. So that episode where the "What's Your Wound" was 904, which is where Rick left, right? Well, Morgan left like 2 seasons before that. He left, I want to say he left in season 7 is when he took off before season 8. Unless it was in season 8. Okay, I'm not remembering for sure right now. But the point is, he was not in the series anymore. He was alive and somewhere else. And that's exactly what we think is going on with Beth. The other interesting thing that really stuck out to me is that it doesn't say her name, or at least in the one I watched, like when you put on the subtitles, on every other character who had a voiceover, it said their name. So it said Abraham, colon, and then "What's your wound?" And then it said, who else was there? Lori, colon, "What's your wound?" So it told us who it was. And with Beth, I was waiting to see her name and it said woman. It didn't say Beth. And so it was like, why would they go out of their way not to put her name in the subtitles? That's really strange. And they didn't do that with Morgan. I mean, I think we saw Morgan, right? So it wasn't so much a voiceover, but she's the only one that they were like weird and mysterious about. So that also tells me that something's up that does put her in a class by herself out of all the, quote unquote deceased characters that were in that episode. But yeah, other than that, I think it might just be a matter of her being paralleled with Morgan, and it was their way of, you know, they were hinting at things there, but it's hard to nail down exactly what it was because there's too many variables to account for. But I do want to go back and rewatch that episode and maybe do another deep dive on, uh, what do you call them? The tarot archetypes and things like that, because I do think that there's more to learn and we just haven't nailed it down yet. So I hope that helps at least. And keep in mind that it is just a theory. There's a lot that we weren't able to figure out when we watched that episode and we just kind of left them for the future. But I hope that at some point we will be able to figure them out. So thanks for the question. Um, the clocks have always been a huge chunk of evidence for TD, but for me, I thought the other day that maybe 4810 represents her in the 5th season. her solo episode, her death episode, and the last episode that she was mentioned in season 5 was 10. It's all I can come up with, and I'm just trying to make sense of all the symbolism that has never been explained. Yeah, so I remembered saying something like that. At first, I thought it was all the episodes she was in, but that doesn't entirely work because she was in 7 as well. I think you're on the right track, but I think it has less to do with episodes she actually appeared in and more to do with episodes that show in some way her arc. So obviously 4 and 8, she's actually in those, and they're her waking up at Grady and then the death fake out. But then 10 is like the resurrection episode. So think about it this way. They've used this template with people other than Beth, right? We've had a few characters go through this. Where they wake up in a strange place. They don't know where they're at. Just think like Rick in the pilot episode, right? And at some point, there's a death fake out, and then we learn they're alive. And sometimes, like, especially when Rick left the second time into the CRM, that took seasons to get through that template. It wasn't just 1 or 2 episodes in between each step. But on the flip side, we've actually seen all of that happen in a single episode. The one that comes to mind, although anytime you get a minor death fake out with a character, they're doing this. But the one that comes to mind is in season 4 when they were headed toward the veterinary college and they left Ty in the car. And then he suddenly came out of the woods and he was okay, right? So it was like a little mini resurrection arc. So they use this all the time. But I think that it shows, a big part of it is her waking up in a strange place and not knowing where she's at, and she's separated from team family, and that's what happened in 4. And then 8 is the death fake out, and 10 is the resurrection. So they're almost like the 3 essential steps of her arc. But like I said, she was in episode 7, but that episode it was just showing some details at Grady. It didn't have a massive huge step in her arc. And then we actually did see her in 5B in a flashback that Sasha had, which again, it's not a big part of her arc. That was more about Sasha's PTSD than it was actually about Beth. So I think we have to think of this more on the symbolic level than on the, what episode did she actually appear in level. But yeah, I do think you're on the right track. Gimple said the clocks definitely meant something. And I think he was hinting at her arc with them. It's just, it's not very straightforward. Gimple does put symbolism in and he does encourage us to look for it, but it's not like every time there's a death, there's a skull and crossbones on the wall in the back. I mean, that would be really easy. That would be like a 1-to-1, really obvious symbolism. And Gimple symbolisms are never that obvious and they're never that simple. There's like 7 levels of them all the time. So we have to kind of work to figure out what they mean. But yeah, that's a really excellent observation. Thanks for sending that in. I always think that season 5 would have been so much better if they had just focused it all on Terminus. Grady had no point at all. Beth could have died saving the gang from Terminus and be a real hero. It also would have made Terminus more memorable. Instead, we get a hospital storyline that I think was added at the last minute. Well, I mean, if you've listened to me at all, you know that I don't agree with that. I don't think it was, I think we have plenty of evidence that it wasn't added at the last minute. We have foreshadows of Grady in season 4. So at least in season 4, which Gimple took the reins the end of season 3. So he already was planning Grady at that point. And that's kind of it's really the whole reason that I think we can prove that it wasn't last minute, and by extension, that they're planning to bring her back, because that right there, the fact that they were foreshadowing it in season 4 shows that it wasn't last minute. And if it wasn't last minute, then them saying it was last minute and she only learned the week before that her character was getting killed off is a lie. It is a bald-faced lie. So if they're lying about that, why would they lie about that unless they have something to hide, unless they're trying to fake us out some way? You see what I mean? So one leads to another. Yeah, I mean, I think especially at the time, most of us would have liked her to have gone to Terminus because that means she would have been with the group and been with Daryl. But yeah, I mean, beyond that, it's all just kind of conjecture. But as you know, I don't think she is actually dead, and I think that this has been planned for a long time. So yeah. Let's see, next one. Hi, good to see you back. Since I don't really follow the filmings, I usually try not to bother with anything that happens outside the show. My update is usually you and other TD theorists, but something happened that really awakened my interest. After the Americans could get back to TikTok, Emily Kinney also got a comment, "Welcome back to Harry Potter," or something alike. Emily's answer was pretty interesting. She said, and I quote, "I was not in Harry Potter, that's a different actress. I'm in a different show." This made me double take because she used past tense when talking about Harry Potter, that she wasn't in it while she was talking in present, that she's in a different show, or maybe I just want this to be true too much. I mean, yeah, as with all things, we have to acknowledge that it might have just been a slip of the tongue from her, but I don't know. It seems to me, I think I answered something about this before, um, but it was more specifically that she was talking about Luna Lovegood. And so I just kind of reiterate, what I said then, that it's also a matter of why did she feel the need to correct this? Because people mistake actors and actresses all the time for the wrong show that they were in or the wrong thing. I've heard a lot of interviews with actors saying that, oh, this person thought I was in this show and I really wasn't, and it's just something they deal with from fans because people don't always keep their stories and their movies straight, right? So it's a little bit interesting that she felt the need to correct this and yeah, I don't know. I feel like there could be a hint there that sort of parallels her with Luna, but I already talked about that in a previous Ask video. So yeah, it's definitely really interesting, and I'm glad you guys brought this to our attention. So it'll be interesting moving forward if we see anything like this or if there's anything we can equate it with. But on the other hand, it might also just be the way that she answered back and she wasn't really thinking about it. So no way to tell for sure. Thank you very much or thank you so much for all your videos. They are giving me a better perspective as I fully go through the series again and the new spin-offs that I haven't been able to watch yet. What mysterious character are you referring to at the end of this video? Um, oh, the blonde curl. Okay, I was very late to the fandom and had no knowledge of those web episodes. Could you enlighten me on that? Yeah, so it's actually at the end of Fear the Walking. Well, okay, no, it's not at the end. I want to say that it's Fear the Walking Dead. It's the final season, so that's one of the spin-offs, but it's like the mid-season finale of the final season. So it's probably episode 8. It's right in the center. And they did this little after the credits scene where we see a character who hears Madison's transmission and we see the blonde curl on her. And then they tried to pass that character off as Troy. And it was clearly not Troy. So yeah, it's not in the main flagship show. It's in Fear the Walking Dead, which is the spinoff that Morgan is in. So you can go find it there. And I hope you have tons of fun rewatching and watching everything for the first time. Okay, this is something that came to my brain with nothing to back it up. So I guess just treat this as a bit of fun. Could Beth have a connection to the Statue of Liberty? She's a symbol of freedom, inspiration, and hope. Her crown represents the sun, Beth. She's holding a torch, burn it down. And there are broken chains and shackles under left foot. Obviously different meaning, but Beth did get caught in a bear trap. Also, the blue copper color is one Beth is seen to be wearing. It was sent from France, where Daryl started, and is seen as a symbol to welcome immigrants by sea. It's also located where Maggie currently is. I don't know, is this straw grasping, LOL? I mean, I like it. I like everything you're saying, and there are some obvious ties to what's going on in the story, like France and Maggie being in New York and everything. So I mean, possibly. It would be interesting once we get Dead City season 2 if we actually did see some sort of emphasis on the Statue of Liberty. And it almost seems like people might have talked about this before. Like it almost seems vaguely familiar that I might have had a discussion about it, but I don't remember for sure if I did or if I did what was said. But yeah, we should watch that moving forward because I almost think they almost can't get away from the Statue of Liberty being in New York City, right? So you would think that we would see it at some point. So yeah, we'll just have to watch this moving forward. But if we did see it, yeah, I don't think I'd be able to help but compare it to Beth's symbolism. So yeah, good call. And thanks for sending that in. We'll have to keep an eye on it. I am new to the Bethel fandom and trying to look back on 10 years of evidence and interviews and spin-offs or TWD universe clues about Beth. Is there an existing timeline of all these things that you or someone else has created, or can you make a video that's a rundown of Team Delusional for beginners? I do not have a timeline, no. The easiest, and when I say easiest, that is I'm using that in a very loose way. The easiest way to do it would be like to watch your way through the series and make note of them as you go. Now, if you go through my archive, which I can put my archive link in the show notes of this, you can go through, I mean, it's not exactly um, chronological with the episodes, but I do have a link in my archive that links to different episodes, so you could go through them episode by episode. Anyway, we don't have a timeline like that that I know of. So I will link you to a few videos and posts that I have. So look in the show notes of this that are kind of the basics so that you can read through them or watch and just like the basic things you need to know about um, the weirdness of her death, the way they set it up, and the missing 17 days and the missing scenes from season 5 shooting. I mean, those are like the foundation of it. But there's so much that we've come up with, from all the different episodes because they use a lot of the same symbolism over and over again that I don't know if it's possible to get it all into one document, but I'll just link you to those and then I might, I don't have it in front of me to look at it right now because I'm recording, but I want to say I have a video where I did go over some of those things. So I will also link you if I have them to videos on my YouTube channel that will help you to get some of those foundational things. Okay. And if I can in the future, I mean, I would love you guys, I would love to do a rewatch from the beginning to the end, but that's going to take me years at this point. I have a lot going on right now, so I can't really do that right now, but maybe at some point in the future I will be able to. Um, can you solve a timeline problem for me? Most people in the wiki say that Maggie and Beth had different mothers, that Josephine was Maggie's mom and Annette was Beth's. I always believed it because of how deeply devastated Beth was about the barn massacre and Walker and Annette trying to attack her. But here's my problem. In season 2, Maggie and Herschel talk about how when Maggie was 14, she was mad about her mom dying and Herschel marrying Annette, and she acted out smoking and shoplifting. In season 2, Beth was 16 and Maggie was 22. That's a 6-year age gap. If Maggie was 14 and throwing a fit about her dad marrying Annette, that would have to mean Beth was 8 when Herschel got remarried, which doesn't fit with the half-sisters theory. Was Maggie just a newly minted teenager experiencing angst and deciding to have an issue with Annette 6 years after the marriage, or do we actually think Beth and Maggie are both Josephine's daughters? There's also the odd tidbit that Maggie called Annette mom when Glenn asked her what she called the Walkers, not typically what I'd expect from someone who got a stepmom at 14. Was there an interview or panel that explained this? Dying to hear if you have an answer. Um, I don't know of an interview or panel that explains it, so I guess I never thought about it too much. What I would assume they're saying here, because it is pretty well established that they are half sisters, that they're both Herschel's daughters, but had different mothers. So I definitely think that's true. So what I would assume they're going for here is just kind of the first thing you said, that Maggie was a teenager who was acting out. So she had probably had the stepmother for several years now, and she was just always a little bit resentful about it. But young children, I mean, it's going to depend, of course, on their personality and disposition, but they're less likely to give voice to things like that because they're young and they're nervous and don't know what to do and all of that. But Maggie, she's got a very dominant personality, right? She's bossy, as as Beth pointed out to Daryl, and she's just very dominant. She's not terribly nurturing. So I think when she hit those teenage years, she was probably a nightmare teenager, right? She probably acted out in every way possible, and I can totally see her yelling at her dad about getting married, too soon after her mom died or whatever. Um, but she just didn't really act on it or complain about it in a big way until she hit those teenage years, and then she would have used it as an excuse to act out. So I do think that that's probably, what you said, that's probably what they're going for. um let's see. And then what she says to Glenn, I think that's really more, it's how she's saying it, because the thing is, there's also the brother, Sean, and I don't know who his mom was. But I mean, if everybody referred to Annette as mom, I mean, the point is, Maggie might have acted out as a teenager and been angry about that, but once she got a little older, an older teenager, like 18, and then became an adult, went off to college, she got over it. I think she still loved and respected her stepmother. Um, so, I think it's just the way that they phrase things that can be a little bit unclear, but I'm pretty sure that that's what it is, that they have different mothers. And so they just weren't super clear about like how old everyone was when everything happened, but that's kind of my take on it. So yeah, I hope that helps. Do you think the age gap between Daryl and Beth is why they've waited so long to reunite them? If we go by the most generous of estimations, Daryl was in his late 30s or early 40s in season 4, and Beth was 17, maybe newly 18, but still alone. That would still be enough to make most casual viewers cringe at the relationship between them. With all the time jumps and spinoffs considered, about 10 years will have passed post-Coda by the time Daryl Dixon 3 comes out, making Daryl 40s to 50s and Beth late 20s, nearly 30, much more palatable for general audiences. Is this intentional? If so, do you think there was an oh shit moment while filming S4 that they realized Emily and Norman had serious chemistry, but that the characters' ages meant they needed to hit the pause button, narratively speaking, and her death was the easiest way to do that? Um, no. Overall, I don't think that's why at all. And I know that there's a lot of people that will disagree with me on this, but I think the story was always planned to be exactly like this. I think from season 2, um, Gimple wanted to do this big story with Beth where he showed her first being a very weak character and then becoming very strong, and then, you know, do a death fake out and then have her come back. I think at least from season 3, they were already planning to put her with Daryl because there is evidence of that pretty early on in the season, that there's a little bit of something there. And keep in mind that in season 3, she was 17. Like, we know that for sure. And so I don't think that they were planning to put her with Daryl at least for another year before, I think they knew early on that she needed to be 18. I mean, you can always make the argument that this is the apocalypse and things 100% would be completely different than how things are in our culture. I think age would go completely by the wayside for that sort of thing. And it would just be more about whether anyone is being victimized or whether the relationship is healthy. So of course you're still going to watch out for predators, but it's just wouldn't have the cutoffs, the legal cutoffs that we have now. So anyway, but even so, I think the writers knew that because this was a widely watched show and their fandom is not exactly known for being calm about things, that they needed to make sure that she was 18, and they did that. And it's not uncommon to show chemistry between two people, but then wait 2 or 3 years to actually put them in a relationship. Like that happens all the time, both in real life and in fiction. So I think that they always knew that she needed to be 18. But they also knew that she was a very mature character, and Daryl is, especially back then, he was less mature, and by that I just mean he was not emotionally as developed as she was, and so it would work, despite the physical age gap. Emotionally, they would be on the same page. And I think that they planned her story this way. So so many people used to say that they killed her off because the people who didn't want them together were calling Daryl a pedophile and saying that there was a problem here. And so they just hurry and killed her off. You guys, there is no way that is the case. They were foreshadowing Grady in season 4, which means they were already planning to kill her off, or, quote unquote, kill her off, do the death fake out in season 4. So it was not done as a reaction to anything the fans said. Also, I do think, I mean, we don't have an exact on this, but I do think Daryl is meant to be in his mid 30s in season 4. And so it's, I mean, maybe I'm splitting hairs. It's, it goes from like a 20 years age gap to like a 15-year age gap, but it's not as much as people make it out to be. That's why they keep dyeing Norman's hair. He really should be just as silver-haired as Andy is, but they're trying to make him younger because they want to put him in this relationship with Beth. So, Daryl is a lot younger than in the show than Norman is, so keep that in mind. It's still a decent sized age gap, but it's not quite as much. I mean, I've said this before, but it used to annoy the crap out of me because people would say that it was like a 30-year age gap. They would say, well, Norman is 50 and Beth is 17. And I was going, okay, you can't compare his real life age to her fictional age, guys. It doesn't work that way. I think it's really meant to be more like 15 years. And maybe that would still bother most people. I don't know. But you have to keep in mind, once again, that this is the apocalypse and the ages, what might bother us in our real world society is just not going to be applicable in a zombie apocalypse. It's just not. And the thing is, there are plenty of other stories, movies, shows that have addressed this, and they do not get half the flack that The Walking Dead does for Beth and Daryl. And so that's how you know that it's not coming from most people. It's coming from the haters who just don't want Beth and Daryl together, who want him with someone else or don't like her, or whatever the case may be. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But anyway, to return to your question, I don't think at all that that age was a factor other than just making sure she was 18 so that it wasn't weird. Beyond that, I think they always planned to take her away and bring her back. I do think that it took longer than they originally planned, and I've talked about that lots of times before because of how long it took to tell the comic book arcs and the way technology has changed and COVID and all of that. It just made it longer than it was meant to be originally, but it is what it is and they move forward. So um, you also say this thing about, oh shit, as though they didn't know there was going to be chemistry. Again, I don't think that's a thing. I think they were planning to put them together one way or the other. And it wasn't like they did this episode to see if there was chemistry. When they did this episode, the plan was already fully in motion. So anyway, I know that there are lots of people who disagree with me on that, but we have plenty of evidence that they planned this whole arc way in advance. And maybe that evidence, depending on which one you're looking at, doesn't necessarily show her return, but it does show that this was planned from the beginning. So it was not a reaction to something that happened, like some sort of backlash from the fandom in season 4. And even Greg Nicotero has said more than once that they are going to tell the story they have set up to tell, and they do not care what the fan reaction is. There are some shows that can't afford to do that. If they don't have very much viewership, then they have to pay attention to what the fans are saying, because if they lose a big chunk of their fans, they're going to go off the air. But The Walking Dead was never that. I mean, they have, even today, it is still one of the most in-demand shows in the world, even though it's not in its flagship era anymore and they're doing spinoffs. It's still, you guys, it's still one of the most in-demand shows in the world, especially Daryl and Norman's character. So they don't have to worry about getting a backlash from a small portion of the fandom who wants Daryl and Carol to be together. I mean, they're going to get that either way, but it's not going to affect them if those people stop watching. And I think we know after all these seasons that those people always say they're going to stop watching, and then the next season they're still watching and complaining about things. So this is all stuff that the powers that be take into account, and just try to steer away from thinking that any decision they make is based on what the fandom is saying online, because it's not. That's been proven over and over and over again that they're not basing their decisions on that. They set up a story, they tell the story, they do exactly what they want to do, right? And the story has been set up since at least season 4, if not prior to that. So, but thank you, good question. 401 questions. Do you think the bleeding eye walkers were a result of Grady or other big force experimenting on walkers? Is there any deer symbolism in the line when Patrick thanked Daryl for bringing back the deer yesterday? It was a real treat, sir. I know we don't see a deer, but do they mention them often? Okay, good questions. So we do think that the bleeding eye illness was significant. We don't know exactly where it came from or what it meant, but we do think that it might be related to the CRM or to the overall storyline at large. I mean, like, so we have now in Europe, we have like these super walkers, and there's always the cure theory. We think that all of that's related and it's going to come out in some way as either a cure, something that caused the zombie apocalypse, or something someone else is working on that's a really nasty variation of it, or you know what I mean? It's something in the world beyond. We saw them experimenting with the green gas, with the chlorine gas on people and turning them into walkers, and like really watching closely the way, like the physiological turn and like the steps of it. So there's definitely experimentation going on. And we do think that the reason we saw the bleeding eye walkers there is a hint of something. It might be something direct in the plot, or it might just be a foreshadow of something. Maybe that particular illness won't directly tie to whatever the CRM is up to, but it was a foreshadow of something bigger that's coming. So we do think it's important, but because they haven't revealed everything to us about the overall story arc that they're heading toward, it's hard to say exactly how to tie it in. But you're on the right track. It does seem to be something that was really significant. And I would also challenge you, if you get the chance, to watch the whole first half of season 4. If you look at what happens, like in the prison when everybody gets sick, there's a lot of foreshadowing there. There's a blonde woman who is not a main character. There's more than one, actually, who, like, we never know their names because they're just other people at the prison who aren't main characters, who like get shot in the head. Like, they act out Beth getting shot like 4 times in the first part of the 4th season. Happens at the big spot. Happens a bunch of times. So there's a lot of foreshadowing there. There's the fact that water and hydration play a really big part in helping people get past that illness. Water is a huge symbol. Things like that. So you're definitely on the right track. I do believe that there is deer symbolism in Patrick's line. We always say that when the deer dies, the human lives, and when the deer lives, the human dies. So I mean, I don't even know that I would be too nitpicky about what the symbolism meant here, other than that they are introducing deer symbolism as an important symbol, right? You could always say that if Daryl obviously shot this deer, it actually fed people, right? It was sustenance for them, so it helped people to live. And maybe that was just their way of very, very subtly putting the symbolism in there from the beginning, because the deer symbolism is a big deal around Beth. The fact that Daryl sees the dead deer in the forest in 510 shows that she actually lived. Um, so yeah, and then of course we saw it with Lizzie and Mika. So it might have just been a very general way to introduce the deer symbolism. I wouldn't read into it too much beyond that, but I mean, you're right that it's important and that they were like hinting at it, almost like their way of saying, hey guys, look, a deer, pay attention to this, so that we would know to look for it later on. At least that's what I think. And once she returns, once they tell us more about the bleeding eye virus or wherever it is they're going with it, I think a lot of these things will make a lot more sense symbolically. We'll be like, oh, that's why they did that, but we're not quite there yet. So can't say for sure. All right, final ask for today. I went a little bit longer on this video, but it's probably the only one I'm going to do for this week. So let me do this last one that's in here. Curious if you've ever done a deep dive on ladybugs. Was rewatching still and realized I never thought too deeply about why Beth picked that ladybug off the leaf when she was setting up camp. Everything else she and Daryl do during that montage is practical and for survival. Fire, hunting, the perimeter fence, even setting up their meager shelter. The ladybug just felt like such an out of place moment. Was it purely to show Beth still finds beauty, small pleasures in the world, or was there deeper symbolism? Both. It was to show that she still sees beauty in the world and that she's a very pure and very optimistic person. But go back to 401, the famous Bethyl hug scene when he goes to tell her that Zach died in her cell. There are ladybugs up on the walls. So ladybugs are definitely a Beth symbol. The other thing you have to understand about ladybugs, and this did not come entirely clear until season 6, when the wolves attacked Alexandria, there was one, it was actually the one that Carol was pretending to be, was named aphid. Now, aphids are a natural enemy of the ladybug. Just go ahead and look them up. But ladybugs devour aphids. So okay, sorry. I wanted to look it up and make sure that I was talking about it the correct way, because I haven't looked at this in a long time. But yeah, I was right. Aphids tend to kill plants. So when you have a garden that isn't doing really well because of pests, aphids are something that eats plants and makes them die, basically. So ladybugs are a gardener or a farmer's friend because ladybugs will eat the aphids. So this is where we all started to go, whoa, there is a tie here. It very clearly showed that the ladybug is a Beth symbol, both because it was in her cell, and then, like you said, she picked the one up in still. And I don't think we've ever seen anyone else that was that obviously shown with ladybugs. Okay, so it's definitely a Beth symbol. And like her and no one else, it's not a Michonne symbol, it's not a Maggie symbol, it's not a Carol symbol, it is a Beth symbol. And then they went out of their way to name this person who was a wolf an aphid. That was the name this person took for themselves. They kept calling Carol aphid. They were like, hey, aphid, come over here. But it was because they thought that Carol was their fellow wolf person, but she had killed them and taken the wrap that went around their face. So she was just disguised as them. But we're going, okay, well, if Beth is the ladybug, that suggests that she will conquer the wolves in some way, because we had this person named aphid there, and ladybugs eat aphids. They prey upon aphids in like the bugs. So the actual ladybugs prey upon aphids in gardens. So yeah, there's a lot of depth of symbolism there. And this is why we thought she was so entangled with the wolves. And, the wolves kind of came and went, and obviously she didn't come back, but I think it's all about the symbolism of it. And the wolf symbol is still alive and well. So what does that mean? I think what we're going for is, ladybugs are seen as very dainty and very I guess you could call them very feminine because they're ladybugs. Of course, there's male ladybugs, but everyone always thinks about them as being like a very beautiful and sweet and gentle. I mean, people aren't afraid of ladybugs the way they are of spiders. Ladybugs don't really hurt us as humans, but they are very predatory toward aphids. So it's the epitome of an insect that is both very feminine and has a lot of, optimism, sweetness, positivity, light, but then can turn around and be a real warrior when the enemy shows up. So I think that's um, kind of what they're going for there, and that's very indicative of who Beth is or who she will be when she returns. So, great question. Haven't thought about that in a while, but yeah, we back in the day, both in seasons really 5 and 6, um, there was a lot of talk about Beth being associated with the ladybug, but we haven't seen it in a while because we haven't seen her in a while. And like I said, they don't really do the ladybug thing with anybody else. So, great question. Thanks for bringing that up. And yeah, makes me excited to see what happens in Daryl Dixon season 3. Okay, that's it for today, guys. I will be back probably next week with more. Please feel free to send in more of your asks. Um, we know that we're getting Dead City season 2 pretty quickly here, and I'm excited for that. See where that goes. And yeah, other than that, I will talk to you soon. Bye.